Hi, everybody. My name's Kimberly Maize, and I am a trauma resolution expert. I am the creator of the Trauma Response Syndrome model and a previous clinical social worker turned trauma revolutionary. I am proud to introduce my daughter and co-host, Savannah Woodard.
Thanks, Mom. I'm Savannah, a second-generation trauma specialist, a trauma-informed coach, and care advocate, and together we are a new generation.
We are a mother-daughter powerhouse duo determined to decrease the stigma of trauma and bring focus to healing transgenerational trauma through open conversations.
Please listen as we share our story on how we healed transgenerational trauma through radical self-awareness and responsibility.
Because remember, when families heal,
society heals.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, and welcome back to a New Generation podcast.
Hi, everyone.
So just as a reminder, today we are starting our 5-part series on perspectives. Last week, we shared leading up to the ultimate boundary, and today we're going to be talking about the divide and what happened after the police found my mom in the hospital. Just again, this is an untold story. We don't know what happened to one another. We did that intentionally. There have been many conversations where we've kind of started to talk about it. We're like, nope, not till the podcast. So this is very intentional. We want to be able to hold space for one another. And so today will be the first part in my perspective, a daughter's perspective. And next week I'll be holding space for my mom and as she shares her perspective. And then the week after that, we're going to be talking about opposing perspectives. How can two people have the opposite perspective of the exact same situation? And then we'll share more about that later. So is there anything that you want to say, Mom, before I start my story?
I want to remind everybody, this is a potential trigger warning. We talk about suicide, ideation, completion, ideas. We talk about
hospitalization.
Yeah. What other things? Police, arrest. Not in this episode specifically, but we will in future episodes. And we have, other subjects that might be disturbing to some viewers. So please keep yourself safe and watch as you are able, listen as you are able. Today's intention, like Savannah said, is for me to simply hold space as she shares what happened after I left the house that we shared together in Boulder, Colorado, when we lived together after Savannah's husband, my son-in-law, took his life. Just a reminder, this episode is after what happened in last week's episode. So it might be helpful to go back and listen to that if you haven't, because starting here might not make a whole lot of sense. Of course, we suggest that people go back to the very first episode for everything to make sense, but definitely the episode before this one.
Yeah.
I have not listened to what she's going to say today. As she said, I'm going to hold space, listen, validate. We have discussed that questions are welcome, clarification, those kinds of things in case I'm not clear on what happened. We feel this is an essential part of our story. We've been leading up to this. And so listen and hear and learn, hopefully. Ready to get started?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I first want to just talk a little bit about what it's honestly taken for me to get here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we were supposed to record. So today is Monday. We were supposed to record on Friday, and I was already really overstimulated and like had a little mini panic attack. I think I just kind of flipped out and had to leave and left upset. And I think that, we we have talked it through and it was fine. It wasn't that big of a deal, but I didn't realize at the time that it was because of this content, and it's just a lot for me. And, I was thinking about why does this feel so different compared to everything we've talked about? Because, we have anxiety, leading up to all of them, but I felt really, this one just feels different. And I think it's because, one, you haven't heard it. And although my rational mind knows that even if you disagree with it or it upsets you, like, we'll be fine. But my inner child is definitely like, I'm going to upset you. I'm going to cry this whole time, just so everybody knows. Should have even done my makeup, probably.
Yeah, I know. I thought about that.
Or mascara free.
I thought that this morning. I'm like, am I going to cry?
We do both have toilet paper. That's another thing. We don't usually bring toilet paper or tissues, so for our tears, but so I think it's that. I also think that I have a lot of guilt and shame around the situation, and just some of the actions that I took, my perspective, like, just really isn't in alignment with who I am as a person. And so, that's really hard. I know for a lot of trauma survivors is that we do things to get our needs met that aren't truly in alignment with our cores and our core values and beliefs. And so,
definitely,
I feel really anxious to, like, share such a raw and vulnerable part of myself, because my whole life have felt like I really need to present a certain way and look a certain way. And so when this type of stuff comes up where, it's just really hard for me to do this. So I just want to put that out there, that this is really difficult for me. I'm going to try not to sob the entire time.
Okay.
It's
okay if you do.
So just tell me if I look like a raccoon.
You look beautiful.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to compose myself a little.
Try to detach a little bit.
Yeah, it feels very raw. Yeah, we literally, like, usually talk these things through beforehand to avoid this. Not that we shouldn't cry, but we're definitely, like, trying to set a certain intention and get a message across. And so not every episode can just be a blubber fest for the educational component. But this was very intentional. Because when we prepare for these episodes, we're pretty emotional. Okay.
We get the crying out for the most part so that we can find some resolution and calm. Not that we think crying is an issue, not at all, but it's like, if we cried all episode long, it would be a difficult for everyone, I think. Well, but today, that's an intention.
Yeah.
Just be raw and vulnerable. And I think it's a really good opportunity to repair and to show, that even though we went through what we went through and what happened, we're able to listen and validate and hold space. And, this idea of perspective, as Savannah and I have talked through this, especially in the beginning, it was just, and during the divide, when my mom would kind of share things that Savannah was saying, I was just blown away that I'm like, how could she possibly see it that way? Because our perspectives were like night and day. And I think that's really important for everyone to see and hear how different we see things than other people, including our children, our parents, those kinds of things. And it's not until we find some resolution within ourselves that we can come together and hear, okay, this is a totally different perspective. Can I hear it? Can you communicate nonviolently? Can we hear each other? That's basically where we've gotten to. I think it's really, really amazing.
I think for so long we just couldn't meet in the middle. We couldn't compromise.
Yeah, so it was very extreme, very black and white, very wounded. So Good for us.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, and this morning, getting ready to come here, it's so interesting, doing this work for a really long time. It takes a really long time to get here. But when you can witness your trauma responses want to act out, and you've learned how to master your mind in a way where it doesn't do what it wants to.
Well, and the trauma isn't the trauma isn't so extremely painful that it just motivates your behaviors no matter what you think and feel.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was also thinking about that on the way here, just thinking about all of this, kind of preparing myself for this, of just like, it's so interesting when you can physically feel your brain integrating.
Yeah.
And it's so bizarre. I'm like driving on the way here and I'm thinking about this and this and this and this, and everything just kind of fell into alignment for me. Things just started making sense, like ideas about the guilt and shame and why I did what I did, and just my thought patterns and, the roles and all of it. It just kind of just settled in. And it's so layered. This work is so layered that you can think about things so many times, and then all of a sudden it just kind of clicks. And I'm driving and I'm just like, this is so bizarre. I can literally feel like my fragments integrating right now. I just got to keep driving, and this morning before I was in the car, I was getting ready. My mind is literally thinking of all the excuses that I could make to not come here.
Oh.
All of the reasons why. And I was like, why am I doing that? And I'm like, because I'm so ashamed.
Oh, you're so brave.
And I feel really brave. Yeah, that I'm here because I don't want to do this. I want to pretend like it didn't happen and just ignore it and move on. But I know that that's not, because my attachment is, I'm always working on my attachment. And this is the stuff that really, I feel, works through those true attachment wounds, my abandonment issues, in quotes, like those, I'm very anxious and then I'm avoidant, and I'm anxious and I'm avoidant, and then I cling on and cling on. So I'm kind of all over the place. I don't know. Would you say I'm anxious avoidant or I'm disorganized?
I'd say you're anxious mostly now.
I used to be very avoidant.
Well, this is a good kind of segue for just a moment. The trauma response syndrome model perspective on attachment versus attachment theory, who teaches or your attachment style is permanent. And that is absolutely false. And it takes a lot of work and self-awareness and stepping into very uncomfortable feelings. But I used to be extremely disorganized, and I was disorganized in relationships versus avoidant. Like if I'm in a relationship with a man, I'm very disorganized, but every other time I'm extremely, extremely avoidant. And that just that's not true anymore. I can feel the avoidant action going into that avoidant space rather than it's my overall experience all the time.
Yeah, you're witnessing it.
And I could feel it as a trauma response when I don't feel safe, but then I come out of it and it's no longer there. And so as we're discussing your attachment style, it changes. It changes over time.
Yeah, that's definitely really true for me, in that I used to avoid confrontation. And I hated it when you would say that. I would be so defensive because in some ways I'm very direct, and then in some ways I'm very avoidant. I now understand that that's my ambivalence and, inconsistency internally. But anyway, so yeah, I felt like this morning I just, on the way here, driving here, it's about a 25-minute drive to my mom's house where we record. And I don't know how to describe it. I just kind of stepped into my power. I just decided I'm not going to be ashamed of this. I'm not, and then I put on my pump up music, the music that I get kind of amped to. And, I'm like, I got to do this for myself, my relationship with you, you know, my children in the future will listen to this probably. And,
Oh, wow.
you know, it's when they're adults. And all of you that listen, you know, I know we've really gotten such support and such great feedback. And so I feel, I don't want to say obligated because that has a negative connotation, but, you know, I feel like it's a big part of my purpose and my mission to share this. And so I guess I kind of stepped into my own power and, you know, my own spirituality to be able to just muster up just the strength and the courage to be able to do this, because I definitely wanted to avoid it and run away. So all those excuses just non-negotiable. We were just talking about this of like sometimes you've got to decide what's non-negotiable and you just do it even if you're afraid. And that's I feel like where our success has come in, you know. So that was long-winded introduction. Okay. I also want to say that I was going through a lot at the time, obviously, and my chemicals were all messed up in my brain, and I was dissociating. I feel like some of these details are hazy. So if there's like a discrepancy or something, just step in and tell me your perspective a little bit if you need to. But okay, in the last episode, we stopped at, I was on the phone, and I think that they had said that they found you. I thought
the police we're talking about.
Yeah, the police. I thought that they had opened the hotel room, laid their eyes on you, and then hung up the phone. So I don't know totally, like now looking back at it, it's so bizarre of like, I don't know exactly what I thought was going to happen. Like all of this happened so fast and I was so disconnected and hijacked that the impact of what happened didn't really fully hit me until like years later. Because when I get into this control place that we're talking about, which is where my shame is, like that's where a lot of my guilt and shame is this part of me that has to be in control. And it's only with you, or I guess it's with my partners when I get triggered, when my childhood wounds get triggered. But it's this, like, I will do anything to be in control of the situation because I'm so afraid of what will happen if I lose control. And that's a lot of what my perspective was that I have to be in control to keep the kids safe. And I definitely was in total fight or flight at that time because I wasn't completely sure if they were going to hospitalize you. And I knew that you were going to be really mad at me. And I could not handle you being mad at me or dealing with the repercussions of you being mad at me. And so we fled to Golden because I wasn't sure if you were going to be hospitalized. I didn't know if they were going to find you and you were going to pretend to be okay and come after me. That's honestly what I thought was going to happen, or that if you went to the hospital, then you would come after me, which is really bizarre because you've never really come after me before.
No.
But I had convinced myself that you thought that I was a bad mom and you were going to try to take the boys from me because you were so hyper dependent on them for your sense of safety that you would call CPS and have the kids taken from me and put into your care.
Okay.
And I honestly have no idea why I thought that. I don't know if it was an accumulation of all the trauma of like you calling CPS on Heather, which was obviously necessary, but I also didn't really trust myself entirely. I really lost myself after Curtis died. and I had no sense of self, and I didn't really trust myself either. So I was paranoid and hijacked and just like in total fight or flight. And so we fled to Golden,
which is a town 40 minutes from Boulder,
which I felt was just far enough. And I remember thinking that I thought you were in Longmont. Did you go to Longmont to the hospital? And so that was the
I wasn't in the hospital at Longmont, but they took me to the emergency room in Longmont.
Okay. So then, oh yeah, and then they took you out somewhere a little more desolate. So I thought that Golden was far enough that you wouldn't be able to find me. And so we went to Golden, and
did you tell the Kujowskis all of this? Curtis's parent.
I feel like I don't really even remember. I would probably not tell. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I don't feel like I would tell that to Bob, but maybe Karen. And I think Karen would keep the details between the two of us, but would maybe like give a like nicer version to Bob. Because Bob doesn't really know how to handle stuff like this because he's not really dealt with stuff like that. You know, she's a mental health advocate. She works in mental health. She's a social worker. So people like us have a more tough skin. And he's very sensitive to that type of thing. So I don't feel like she would share everything. But I definitely would have said to them that like you were unpredictable, that I was scared for my safety. I was probably scared for the boys' safety. Like, yeah, I definitely would have. But I feel like I repaired that with them. We've talked about it. And now they understand trauma to the extent that they didn't understand trauma at that time. I mean, this was 4 years ago that we're talking about, everybody. So yeah, I have this very deep-seated core belief, and I'm still working through this, and we've talked about it recently, of like your unpredictability, feeling very triggered by you being unpredictable. And there's certain cues, there's certain behavioral cues, there's certain things that you say, a certain way that you cry that indicate that you're becoming unpredictable. And so I think that you crying like that, like we shared in the last episode, there's this guttural cry that triggered that in me, like this animalistic, like fight or flight. So then we were in Golden. I literally couldn't even go to Boulder. I was so hijacked that Bob and Karen drove the boys to Children's Alley to school and back. And I didn't leave Golden for like a week, I think. Because how long were you in the hospital?
A week.
Yeah, you were there for quite a while. They were going to let you out. I thought they were going to let you out, and then they decided to keep you a little bit longer.
They kept me because they felt like I was in danger from you.
Okay, so
they didn't keep me because of me.
Okay, see, I didn't know that. See, which is so crazy. I felt like you were my perpetrator, and you felt like I was your perpetrator, and it was really just a situation. So yeah, I had convinced myself that you were going to come after me, like even like kill me. Like I thought I was in like serious physical danger. I thought you would attack me.
I've never been physically
I don't know what I honestly, and this is not an excuse, I honestly think that quitting drinking cold turkey and the trauma from Curtis dying in such a tragic way, felt like I was brain damaged. I mean, wouldn't that make me act that way? And what happened at Lake Geneva?
Yeah.
Like that.
But you weren't drinking anymore.
Yeah, I guess I was drinking at Lake Geneva. You think that was why I acted like that? I drank plenty.
Partly.
I drank plenty before that and never acted like that.
Didn't you take some GABA or something? You did.
Yeah, I did take an amino acid.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's a story for another time. I don't know if I'll ever share that story, but
Mhm.
that was a rough time. So anyway, yeah, I didn't truly understand the effects of trauma on my brain until about a year ago, when I was finally no longer hijacked from the experience, and I was only getting triggered by like specific instances. This court case is mostly that I've been going through in regards to my first husband has triggered me a few times, and I got hijacked like that. But the contrast of not being like that and then getting triggered like that and not being like that and getting triggered like that has really taught me that I was permanently like that for a good year. Just true hijacked amygdala psychosis. Can I say that?
Mhm.
Yeah, like true, like paranoid, unable to leave the house. And, during this time, so right after, I guess I'm going all over the place. Let me slow down. So going back to, you were in the hospital, then we were in Golden, then it was cleared that you were going back to Iowa. And so then I could go back to the house. And then, honestly, what actually happened is really hazy. I can only describe my inner experience of what I was going through. Like, I don't remember the day to day. I just remember being completely debilitated by working through our enmeshment.
Mhm.
That's what my intention was that I was simply trying to gain control over the situation to break our enmeshment. That's what I always wanted. Every time I set a boundary and throughout my life, unknowingly, I was trying to break our enmeshment. I knew there was something wrong in our relationship dynamic, and I didn't know exactly what was going on. And so I would do this same thing, and I can feel it now in my body. I can recognize it in my body when this control energy takes over me, where I feel like I'm in danger. And so this control mechanism inside of me, like this safety shield, comes up inside of me. And that doesn't happen really anymore. But yeah, that makes me really sad when I think about it, because of things that I've done, because of that control thing. It just makes me feel really bad. Just the whole scenario, like, that I could think this way. Like, I created this entire reality in my head, which was true to a certain extent, of that we were enmeshed and that there was this dependency on me that I literally could not burden anymore. I could not carry it anymore. And so, in order to no longer have to carry it, I go into extreme control in order to release it. And it doesn't ever work. It usually blows up in my face. So I feel like this time I did the most extreme thing I possibly could to get an outcome. And honestly, it worked. I feel like it's what had to happen, but it was really cruel the way that it happened. And that I had to 100% put you in your family system role in order to be able to let go of my own enmeshment, which is really sad for me. I feel really bad about that the only way to be able to let go, I had to put you in a perpetrator role. And I'm sorry for that.
Thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, it was the whole thing. I did have to go in person to Children's Alley, and I told them that I didn't tell them the truth, but I don't remember exactly what I told them. I think I just told them that you and I had gotten into a fight and that you could no longer pick them up. Because I thought you were going to try to go to Children's Alley and take them. And I was thinking about, remember when I don't really want to say his name, but Chris in Fairfield, not your friend, but the other one, the psychopath. And when we were watching his kids,
Yeah.
Remember his ex kept trying to steal the kids from school?
Yeah.
I feel like the reason why I'm bringing these past things up is I'm honestly trying to figure out what would have fed this core belief in my subconscious that didn't rationally, like now looking back, it was so irrational. And it was such an irrational, childlike place. I spoke about that a lot in the last episode, that I felt like I was 12 years old a lot of the time. And that I was acting out of that role, that childhood role. And I honestly thought that I was protecting you and that I was protecting the kids.
Protecting me from what?
Yourself. Yeah. But, you know, the amount of trauma that led up to that point, I feel like my brain just couldn't like process anymore. And after
people have to, I mean, they have to create these stories to justify what they do.
Yeah. I definitely
because
felt
there was
justified.
nothing, I was never physically, I never did anything like that to you or anyone that.
So then you went back to Iowa. And when was this? I don't even know.
February.
It was February of 2021.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I got really sick after that. So once you left and I came down, it took me a few months to come down from the situation. And I started to, because a lot of what happened out of my control. I feel like I was completely in a hijacked state where I had no control over what I was doing, what I was saying. And, you know, people out there might say that that's like an easy way out or like not taking responsibility, but I feel like it is taking responsibility, that I recognize that when I get in that state, I become a person that I don't resonate with. And it takes courage to say that and really, you know, take the actions necessary to work to make sure that I don't get to that place again. Like every day I set boundaries so that I know that I don't get hijacked like that again. Because I get to a place where my brain is so far ahead of my behavior, my actions, that it's like things are happening. It's hard to explain.
No, I think a lot of people understand that.
Yeah.
I understand it.
Yeah. So then when I came down, I started to come down. This is where I'm going to cry. The impact, starting to understand the impact of not only what had happened a few months before, but what had been going on my entire life. And that I felt responsible for my mom's emotions, keeping my mom alive, you know, that caretaker role. Because like I had said, I recreated it in my first husband, Curtis. And so I felt like that first year after you left, I was not only grieving him, but I was grieving you at the same time. It was like double whammy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to raise the kids on my own, trying to get sober. I mean, I was sober, and I literally couldn't handle the impact, and my adrenals just completely shut down. I couldn't get out of bed. I was medically bedridden. I was on bed rest medically for almost 4 months. I couldn't get out of bed. I had to hire babysitters to come take care of the kids and clean the house. I couldn't cook. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't get out of bed. I think that was like the most depressed I've ever been in my life. Like, I tend to be a very anxious person and like doing 1,000 things and cleaning and, working and like doing all the things. And I never had been still in my entire life. And I like literally could not get out of bed. And so I was just faced with everything that had happened. And I would call my grandma just screaming at her, just like screaming and screaming and screaming. And honestly, she just listened to me scream. And then at the end, she would just advocate for you, which is really crazy. That was one place where I don't know if she just wanted to keep the peace or if she, did want to protect you or what, but I would just scream at her like, I will not be responsible. You guys just don't get it. I kept saying to her, at some point, my mom will understand what I'm saying and it will change. But until then, I would rather never speak again because I don't know who I am without caretaking. I have to, like I was talking to my therapist, like I didn't know any of my own beliefs, what I thought as a person, like what my political beliefs were, because they were all enmeshed with you. So everything that you believed, I just automatically believed. And we're actually very different. And I would get upset. Well, in some ways, we're very different.
I don't think we're very different in what, the way we think politically.
Yeah, like sometimes. Well, I guess actually now that we've been talking about it more, we really don't.
You're more conservative than I am.
That's what I'm referring to.
Our foundational beliefs are the same. I'm a little bit more of a socialist than you are.
Yeah.
I don't, to digress, I guess.
No, I just mean, so it was like,
I used to be a very, very political person.
Yeah, and it was very
extreme liberal, extreme socialist, extreme, and would go and, caucus and do all the things with the Democratic Party. And then as I aged and became much more aware and, not to get into any political beliefs, but I don't believe that anymore. I don't believe in the two-party system and those kinds of things. And so as I've aged, but that's what you grew up in.
Well, and you were also very oppositional. So like if anybody disagreed with you, in certain regards, it was not comfortable. And so I felt like, and I just felt like I had to completely abandon myself to please you, which I did. That's just what I had to do. So zero identity, zero non-trauma based identity, right? Like, so I just felt like, I joke now that I feel like I died when Curtis died with him. Like part of me died and I've been reborn. As cheesy as that sounds, like something happened where I could not mask. I could not, like, I just had like a awakening, and stopping drinking and like doing all these things where I became so hijacked and hypervigilant to what was going on. And so I was definitely spiritually bypassing quite a bit.
I did too.
To survive that situation. I was seeing Curtis all the time. He was probably there in spirit, but I was also probably hallucinating at the same time. And then come January, so almost a year later, because my in-laws had been supporting me financially, I couldn't work. I couldn't get out of bed. And we had decided that I should apply for disability and Social Security disability and for mental health. And also I have black mold poisoning, mycotoxin poisoning, and a lot of neurological issues due to that. And
they don't recognize that now. They may someday, but they don't recognize that.
No, I got turned down over a year. I literally could not get out of bed. It's so crazy to think about the process. Like now looking back, I didn't really need it. I mean, I needed it at the time, but it took the year that it took to apply is when I really needed it. And so by the time they turned me down, it was upsetting because I had been like, I could only work part-time. And so I was like, maybe I could work and have disability a little bit. So it wasn't like devastating for a lot of people out there when they get denied for disability. They're like,
Well, they didn't have in-laws that have.
Right. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm in a really privileged situation. If I wasn't in that privileged situation, my kids and I could have potentially like been homeless, because I was mentally unwell. I couldn't get out of bed. Like I couldn't even cook for them. So anyway, that's a big reason why we really advocate for systemic change, because the system itself is broken. That it takes a year to get denied is just really disappointing. So I I saw a functional medicine doctor, an integrative doctor, and she honestly saved my life. Can I shout her out?
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Mary Shackleton in Boulder at Holistica Integrative Care is like the best doctor I've ever talked to, and the only doctor that really makes me feel safe in the office. And her whole staff, they're all trained by One Planet Healing, the Badge of Honor program, and Trauma Informed is just a great relationship. I just die for her. I love her so much. So then I was taking a lot of different supplements. I changed my diet. I started really focusing on protein. So adrenal health. My adrenals basically were in menopause at 30 years old. I was completely depleted of progesterone and estrogen and had very high levels of cortisol. And that's why I couldn't get out of bed. It's like, quote unquote, what people call adrenal fatigue. And I recognize that's not a true diagnostic, illness out there. It's just hearsay to a lot of people, but that is definitely what I experienced. My adrenals were fatigued, and I couldn't get out of bed for.
Well, and people who've experienced trauma know more than
the medical
the medical, and know what they're experiencing, whether it's recognized or not.
Yeah, and they don't understand, the MFHTR gene, and that, when people can't detox properly, my liver wasn't working, my kidneys weren't working, my adrenals weren't working, my brain wasn't working, my nervous system, and all four of like my primary organs were not functioning due to the extreme stress that I had endured. This is a very extreme situation where my husband had been chronically ill. I was taking care of him and two kids. I was not well during that time, drinking a lot of coffee, not getting enough sleep. And so I was already depleted. And then him dying in such a tragic way, enduring this court case, then losing my mom due to the same role that Curtis was in. And I just couldn't function.
We'll not interrupt you, but we'll do another video or on this gene that we're talking about. People aren't going to have any idea what you're talking about. So,
well, maybe it's getting on trend, but I know I agree with you. We really need to break that down. And that's a big part of Enlightened Catering, which is the sister company to One Planet Healing that I own. My mom's my sous chef.
I'm going to say co-owner.
I guess you are, because it's under the One Planet Healing umbrella. But it's all about nervous system regulation through food and nutrition. And that is all through my personal experience of having to learn how to feed my body after it completely shutting down. I was having a lot of vasovagal responses. And for those of you who don't know, is when people have endured extreme trauma in certain circumstances. Mine is like when I get my blood drawn, your heart rate and your blood pressure lower to the point that your body dies as a fight or flight mechanism for a couple seconds, and then you turn back on. And it looks like fainting. And so I thought I was fainting for so many years due to blood sugar, which it could be with
Many
cortisol.
People who have complex trauma also have blood sugar issues, hypoglycemia issues. And they're also very connected to hormone imbalance. Gosh, I used to have those hyperglycemic. I mean, I literally went on a hike on a trail one time, and I'm not exaggerating. I had to crawl on my hands and knees back to the car because my blood sugar had dropped that. I didn't think I was going to make it.
That's so scary.
And those are things that people are just like, oh, this is just how I am. And it's all interconnected. Yeah. All of it.
Cortisol is directly related to glucose. So if you're interested in more of that, we should do a nutrition episode. So many episodes we want to do. So, I feel really blessed that I did have my in-laws that really just gave me whatever I needed at that time. They recognized what was going on, and they were like, whatever it takes to make you okay. And in many ways, they saved my life. So I was eating really healthy, eating really well. There was a Whole Foods literally like 2 blocks behind my house. And so I was going there every day and eating intuitively, eating a lot of protein, a lot of juice. And with Dr. Shackleton's help, a lot of supplements, I was okay. I started to become okay again. And I had been trying to work just as a cleaner for like 9 months, and I had to stop doing that. I applied for disability because I was working like maybe 15 or 20 hours a week. I couldn't even do that. Applied for disability, and I was told by my in-laws to just take a year to heal. And I really did. I healed a lot of my attachment wounds. That was probably the hardest year of my life. Just every day in the fetal position, crying, missing my mom, just like feeling so abandoned. Like my mom would rather be right than love me. Just I felt so abandoned and so wounded, and just like,
what did you think I would rather be right about?
That, how much
You've got tissue on your eye.
That like I felt like I was trying to tell you this perspective for so many years, and you just refused to see it. I just felt like whenever I tried to tell you something I was upset about, I got gaslit because it was your lifeline. And that you would rather, I just felt so abandoned. And like I felt like I was trying to tell grandma what was going on, hoping that you would come to me and say, "Oh, you're right." Like, I just felt like what I said and what I felt never mattered. It just never mattered because you were always the primary concern. I was sick of you being the primary concern. I was like, I need you to recognize that I am affected by you. I'm affected by this situation. I'm affected by our enmeshment. And and I felt like I was trying to say that it was still happening. That I felt like it was still happening and you just couldn't see it. You felt like you were completely resolved. And I knew you weren't. And so I felt trapped, because if you thought you were resolved to the point that you would never talk to me again, there's no way I could convince you.
You thought I was what? Now resolved enough that I'd never talk. I never thought that I was completely resolved.
That's how it presented.
When?
Like you thought I was the sole problem.
See, that's the difference between our thinking. I would have never have thought you were this whole problem. I never think that black and white.
Well, I feel like that's the message I got.
I hear what you're saying.
When I tried to communicate.
But then okay, I don't want it to seem like I'm discounting what you're saying, because we've talked about this. The way that you tried to tell me was violent, communicating.
No, I know that.
Well, I think that's the problem.
I think in the big picture, I always wanted you to be able to, like, this is a core belief that I'm very ashamed of, but I always wanted you to be able to just suck it up and be there for me.
That's what I thought I did.
And
I went there, I think that's the problem.
But I was so debilitated that I couldn't see that. Like I was I
understand now, but
I felt like you were always putting your needs first.
It's interesting that the first time, so this was a divide that was much more intentional and severe, like, we're not going to talk to each other, no contact. Neither one of us wanted to talk to each other, but we had a year in the past where Savannah, you agree, that was setting a boundary, but I didn't know it. And a lot of it had to do with her husband being very sick and controlling what was going on, and her being very overwhelmed by what was going on, but she didn't talk to me at all.
Yeah, I was
For
totally
like
shut down.
6 months, and I had no idea what was going on. And that time I was so debilitated with grief and shame that I was so internalizing blame that I had done something wrong to deserve that. And that was the difference between that time and this time, is there was no internalizing blame of self. I felt like, and this is my perception, I'm not saying it was true, I felt like I did exactly what you wanted and needed. I abandoned myself 1,000% and put you and the boys first 100% of the time, which was part of the problem. So when you were saying that I wasn't doing something, I was like, it wouldn't matter what I did, I'd never be good enough for you. And I think that was true at the time. What happened after this, I died as well. That mother that you're talking about died as well. And that is what needed to happen.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's really interesting to think about, and this may be a little far out, so please stop me if I'm being too much, but when you think about the energy of, I guess it's just physics, but when you think about the energy of a mom, so many studies have shown that a mom and a kid are attached.
Mm-hmm. Well,
yeah. Are attached biologically, yeah. Even outside of the room, mm-hmm. or like miles away. Studies have been shown. And I feel like it's so interesting to think about us being enmeshed energetically. The way we were connected was through enmeshment, and that we literally had to die, or metaphorically had to die energetically to be able to attach in a healthy mm-hmm. way.
Yeah.
And that was, that may be spiritually bypassing, but that is definitely the story mm-hmm. that I was feeding myself to survive those years, because deep down, I knew that we would come back together. Maybe not in those first 6 months when I was so unwell, but as soon as I found my own spirituality again, that is what I leaned on. I would pray and make sure, that deep down I knew, and again, when I talk this way, I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable out there. I totally understand that spirituality and religion can be very triggering for people, and I would never project that on somebody else. I respect your beliefs, and that's very foundational for my recovery. And especially in this situation, if I didn't have some sort of spiritual connection, I would not have survived, mm-hmm. period. That is the only thing that got me through. My own personal strength and courage, which is my own resilience, which I feel is connected to, something bigger, a bigger purpose, a bigger mission, which is this. This is why we're here. I knew in the deep, deep guttural back that we would do something great with this, that there's no way that we could, fight this way and fight darkness in such a way for so long to not come out the other side. And, yeah, I feel like I've lost some of that as I've grown, some of that blind faith I've lost as I've matured over the years, but that's definitely what got me through during that time.
I had to believe. I had to be okay believing I would never see you and the boys again.
And that's what had to happen.
And that's what happened.
That's what had to happen, because that enmeshment, it's so second nature, for people who don't experience enmeshment, it's like foundational to who we were, the way we related to one another, the way we showed up for one another, the way we connected, the way we were attached. And so I feel like I had to step up and protect the kids and say, it's either non-enmeshment or not at all. And it was cutthroat and it was cold. But I feel like that's what had to happen in order for us to be able to reconnect. It's like you have to completely unlearn what you know to relearn in a healthier or, a more self-serving way. So that's what I just really focused on. I just kept telling myself, if I just work on being the best version of myself and get healthy and show up for the kids, I know everything will work out exactly as it's supposed to. And, it did. And that's what we'll be sharing so it'll be the fourth part and fifth part of this series, where we're going to share how our perspective shifted. So we're sharing my perspective of the divide, then my mom's perspective of the divide. Then we're going to talk about opposing perspectives. And then the next two are the shift in perspective after this year of recovery and of a no contact. My mom sent me a letter on Ostera around the spring equinox, and it changed everything. I think it was the first time that I thought my mom could truly take radical responsibility. And I saw that in that letter. So we're not going to say any more than that. But yeah, it was just the first few months after the divide during the divide, I was in full blown fight or flight protection, mama bear, like hyper vigilant all the time. And, something that's to be said too, I think what fed my paranoia and my fear was that there were so many natural disasters going on in my community. There were fires all the time. We were having to evacuate my house all the time. There was a shooting at the grocery store that I went to every day that me and the boys, if it would have happened 10 minutes later, we would have been at the store at this shooting. And 10 people died, including a police officer.
The police officer that
saved her.
That came to the hotel and the hospital.
Yeah. And it was there was a bunch of stuff starting to happen in Boulder County, like crime wise. And so I just felt so unsafe all the time. And I just remember trying to just tell myself that I'm going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Like that was really scary. And then it was a lot of, one really good thing that came out of this situation is my TikTok following. I now have quite a few followers. I have 13,000 followers. And I think a big part of that was that I posted a video on TikTok during that year of me sobbing in the fetal position, rocking back and forth, just sobbing. And I posted, this is what healing abandonment wounds really looks like. It just says isolation and depression and anxiety and all of these things. And that community really got me through too, just being, because I couldn't leave the house. Like I was on bed rest, and then I wasn't supposed to leave the house except for like 30 minutes to walk around the neighborhood. Like I was medically unwell. And so I really leaned on TikTok. I really leaned on just health and going to the sauna and, just doing all of those things. And I feel like it was for the first time ever, as selfish as it might have been, it was the first time I wasn't responsible for anybody. I had never had that in my entire life. I had never been able to just take care of myself. We had babysitters to help with the kids. They were in school and then had babysitters. So my time with them was very intentional. And so I feel like we healed. Me and the boys were able to heal during that time. I was very privileged to be able to do that. And I just cried about what I was upset about. I went to therapy twice a week. I was getting acupuncture and massage and doing everything to just try to heal my nervous system. And I feel like that hiatus, man, I felt like such a bitch for having to do it the way that I did. But I was like, wow, this is what I've needed my whole life. And if my mom has to be upset for me to do this, then I'm going to do it, because I've got to be selfish. I've never been selfish before. So now I've come down from that and processed the sadness around it. And I have found a middle way. But yeah, I think that's the story.
Oh, I'm glad that you had that opportunity. you know, I'm glad that you were able to take care of yourself, um, because that's what you needed and that's what the boys needed. And of course, I'm forever grateful for Bob and Karen. I've always been grateful. Will continue to be grateful. They've gone above and beyond for you and the boys, and as a result, that would be me as well. They're just good, solid, good people.
They really are.
And they had the financial resources to be able to help you at that time. And, of course, we recognize the extreme privilege of that, and that most people don't have anything close to that, which is why trauma is perpetuated. And
I have to say, I feel like that was part of the reason why I was privileged in that way, because I did not take that for granted. Every day I thought, when I'm better, I'm going to do something to change the system, because if I did not have that privilege, I would not have made it through this. And there's so many people out there. I thought all the time on my way to acupuncture, God, I'm so blessed because of Bob and Karen in this situation. And, just thinking about the mom right down the street that's going through the exact same situation, that can't feed her kids and can't house her kids, and let alone get acupuncture, and I really did think about that. That's a big reason why I'm here, because I survived it. I mean, that's a big reason why a lot of us fight the way that we do, because we survived something that's,
well, and because you didn't grow up that way,
yeah,
you were able to recognize.
Yeah, that was crazy. It was wild.
I'm very grateful and thankful for that situation for you, because that was definitely not what was going on for me.
Yeah. So next week we will talk about that, and I'll be holding space for you. The same time frame. Is there anything else you want to say?
Oh, I guess we can talk more about perspective and change in perspective in the future episodes.
Yeah, so we're going to share my perspective now. We're going to share your perspective in the next one. And then the one after that is opposing perspectives, where we're going to compare the two and the needs that we got met and all of that. We'll do more of a deep dive on the difference in perspective and how that turned into meeting in the middle and the change of perspective.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing and your bravery. I hope you feel better.
Yeah. Thank you. I feel a little better. I now feel a little triggered, like I did something wrong, but that will pass. I just don't ever want to hurt you. So
thanks.
Even though, I know I didn't do anything wrong, but it's the human in me. It's hard to, these conversations are hard to, even if they're true, it's really hard to say something to someone that you care about and that you love, and, not want to hurt them. So that's why we're trying to do this very respectively. And I think we're doing a really good job. So thank you all for listening and being kind in the comments and just all of the support we've had. We've really been leading up to this, so it's really cool that we've made it here, and we just really appreciate everybody that listens and follows along. So we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.